Hey everybody, welcome to WTF Hammer Underworlds. So continuing on with the Season 4 Warband reviews, we're moving on to the Storm of Celestus, whose official lore hasn't been released at the time that I'm making this video. And as I always do in these reviews, I'm going to be looking at this Warband's fighter cards, their faction-specific cards, that being their objective and power cards, and I'm going to be rating them on a scale of S to D and comparing them to all other Warbands that have come prior. So let's just jump right into it, starting with the fighter cards. This warband has 4 units, which seems to be a trend in Dire Chasm. As it stands, there's only 1 warband out of 7 that have been released that do not have 4 units exactly. And Storm of Celestus is no exception, being released alongside Drepur's Wraith Creepers in that starter set. So let's just jump right into looking at each of the individual fighters in this warband, starting with the leader Draken Celestus, who, like all the other Stormcast Eternals, inspires when they succeed a Thunderhead Greatbow attack action. So the whole Thunderhead Greatbow is pretty interesting. I mean, good range, typical range weapon, 3 hexes, landing on 2 hammers and doing 2 damage, uninspired and inspired, which is pretty nice. I mean, 2 damage for a range weapon is very solid. The only other warband that really compares are Thundrix Profiteers when inspired, so that's really nice. Only downside here is that they can only use this Thunderhead Greatbow attack action once per phase each. So if they all charge in an attack in round 1, for example, and only one happens to land their shot, only that one will inspire, and the other ones have no opportunity to inspire through any other method. And all these guys also have melee weapons, which are more on the mediocre side. In the case of Draken, he has his heavy stock, which is 1 range, 2 hammers, 2 damage. Going to 3 hammers, 2 damage when inspired, which is pretty decent. I mean, at least very accurate. And his stats are very Stormcast Eternal-like. 3 movement, 1 shield, 4 wounds, going to 2 shield when inspired. So overall, durable, hard to hit when inspired, and pretty flexible with the whole melee and range, not exceptional damage. And final note here is that when inspired, Draken has the special ability where if he's holding an objective, he cannot be driven back, which is very nice, especially when we look later on at their objective cards, which are very heavily focused on holding objective tokens. Next, there's Aphis the Brave, who's pretty similar. Main difference is that he does not get an extra block defense when inspired, which is a bit of a bummer, especially for Stormcast Eternals. Low move, the 3 move, 1 shield, 4 wounds. Same Thunderhead Greatbow, same inspiration mechanic. Then his melee attack is the shoulder bard, so just smacking with the shoulder. 1 range, 3 swords, 1 damage, going to 2 damage and having knockback in both situations. So decent melee, not overly damaging. Also gets a special ability when inspired. If they're holding an objective, you can reroll 1 dice in this fighter's defense rolls. So that helps to sort of balance out the 1 shield, but not really. And next there's Melisande Starsighted, who is basically identical but has a crushing kick, which is 2 hammers, 1 damage, going to 2 hammers, 2 damage with knockback when inspired. And having a very nice special ability when inspired, in which she gets +1 dice on her attack actions if she's holding an objective, meaning that the Thunderhead Greatbow could be 3 hammers, 2 damage, which is quite nice. Only unit that sort of breaks the mold here is the Griffhound. I think it's a Griffhound called Sleek, who has 4 move, 1 dodge, 3 wounds, going to 5 move and 2 dodge when inspired, and having a not so exceptional attack, but fairly accurate, 1 range, 3 swords, 1 damage, and getting ensnare when inspired. Inspiring when that attack lands successfully. And being a pet cannot have attack action upgrades, but can hold objectives. There's no rule claiming that this character cannot. And most powerfully has a special ability called Warning Cry, where as a reaction, this fighter can only make this reaction once per phase. Use this after an enemy fighter's declare attack action step, if that enemy fighter is within 2 hexes of this fighter. If you do, give 1 guard token to each friendly fighter within 1 hex, which can create interesting situations in which an enemy might want to knock one of your friendly fighters off an objective token, and if you have Sleek in the right position, you could slap a guard token on that character, allowing them to hold that objective token. So a very nice ability, and very interesting to apply tactically. So that does it for the fighter cards. Let's just take a look at the pros and cons. Pros being the special combat abilities Knockback and Ensnare, which one of these guys gets when inspired. Their special abilities, their objective token holding abilities. Each of the Stormcast Eternals has a unique ability there. And Warning Cry for Sleek. Ranged attackers, I mean, 3 of the 4 guys are ranged attackers. That's their main focus. High wounds, generally speaking, 4 wounds, only 3 wounds for Sleek, though. And a medium model number, which gives them some versatile options. Cons being the generally low movement, 3 movement for the most part, and the generally low damage, no character having more than 2 damage on any of their weapons on their base fighter cards. So that does it for the fighter cards. Let's look at the objective cards. Starting with the Surge, we have Advancing Storm worth 1 glory. Score this immediately after an activation in which a friendly fighter makes a range 1 attack action that takes an enemy fighter in enemy territory out of action. So can't say I'm a huge fan of this card. It's not bad, but I mean, the fact that you have to land a range 1 attack action when that clearly is not their strength, taking an enemy fighter out of action in their territory requires many circumstantial conditions to be realized. Could be worth a see. Next, there's Balanced Strategy worth 2. Scores immediately after an opponent's activation if your warband holds objectives 2 and 4. So very interesting card. I'm giving this an A because it's worth 2 glory as a Surge. These guys also do have mechanics for controlling the objective numbers that they're holding. It's a pretty good card. Might be worth an S. I have a hard time imagining people playing this warband are not going to include this in their decks. Next, there's Bold Claim, also worth 2 glory points as a Surge. Scores immediately after an opponent's activation if your warband holds 2 or more of the following objectives, 1, 3, and 5. So a slightly more versatile version of the previous card, giving this an S. Very, very nice. Next is Crucial Objective, worth 1. Scores immediately after an opponent's activation if your warband holds objectives 2 or 4, worth 1 glory. Given this an A, I also think it's nice. One thing I forgot to mention, or emphasize rather, was that each of these cards score at the end of an opponent's activation, which is obviously not as ideal as at the end of unactivation period, because it does give the opponent a chance to knock you off of an objective if you spent part of your action holding the objective that would have caused you to score this card. So that's obviously a bit of a negative here and a little bit tricky to imagine how that will play out in actual games, because obviously I haven't played this warband yet. They haven't hit the shelves quite yet as the making of this video. But I still think it is a good card, so I'm giving it an A. Next is Point Blank, worth 1. Scores immediately after an activation in which a friendly fighter made a successful range 3 attack action which targeted an adjacent enemy fighter. So, I mean, good card. Giving it an A. You just have to land the attack. You don't have to take the enemy fighter out of action. So get adjacent, land your ranged attack, guaranteed score. Obviously, depending on you landing that attack, I think it's a good card. So anyway, that does it for the Surge. Moving on to the score in the end phase cards, we have Bulwark Against the Dark, worth 1. Scores in an end phase if each surviving friendly fighter has 1 or more upgrades. So given that a B, definitely a decent card. Pretty likely that each of your guys is going to have an upgrade at some point, but only worth 1 in an end phase. Not a guarantee, because for example, maybe you wouldn't want to upgrade Sleek. I don't know, but I just don't think it's an amazing card. Next is Great Purification, worth 3. Scores in an end phase if your warband holds 3 or more objectives or if 4 or more enemy fighters are out of action. So basically supremacy, but also flexible a bit in the sense that if 4 enemies are out of action, you can score it as well, but that's pretty hard to pull off. I'm giving this an A. I mostly imagine it being successful in terms of supremacy. Although this warband only does have 4 units, so can be hard to score late game if your guys start getting popped off. There's Here We Stand, worth 1. Scores in an end phase if your warband holds 2 or more objectives. So pretty reliable, given that an A as well, because it's clearly the goal of these guys to be holding objectives, so I imagine that will be happening a lot. Next is Lightning Strike. Scores in an end phase if an enemy leader is out of action, worth 1. Given that a B, obviously not a guarantee, and only worth 1. Next is Righteous Banishment, worth 1. Scores in an end phase if 2 or more enemy fighters are out of action. So, I mean, decent odds that this will happen, but if you're playing against Morgox, or Wormspat, or some really hardy elite warband, this becomes almost impossible to score, especially with the low damage output of this warband. And it's only worth 1, so I'm giving it a B. Next is Shining Heroes, worth 1. Scores an end phase if each surviving friendly fighter is inspired. So, I mean, also not a guarantee. It depends on you landing those attacks with the bows, or Sleek successfully attacking with his beak. Late game is pretty likely to happen, especially if you only have a few units left, though. And finally, we have Zone of Banishment, worth 2. Scores in an end phase if there are no enemy fighters in your territory. So a weaker denial, but can be applied on any end phase. Given that a B, might be worth an A. I just imagine that you will have lots of encroaching enemies since this warband is very objective holding heavy. So it could be very difficult to pull off. Anyway, that does it for the objective cards, which typically promote taking enemy fighters out of action in various ways, holding objective tokens in various ways, equipping upgrades, making successful attacks, and protecting friendly territory. So that does it for the objective cards. Moving on to the power cards, we have the Gambits, all ploys, first one being Aetheric Channeling. Play this only in an opponent's power step. The first range 3 attack action made by a friendly fighter in the next activation has your pick of +1 dice. cleave, or ensnare. So a nice versatile card to increase attack accuracy. I'm giving it an A. They also made the wording a little bit more precise, because obviously the starter pack is meant for new players, that this can only really reasonably be played in an opponent's power step if you want to gain the benefits of it. So it's pretty nice of them just to kind of put that in there to prevent people from overthinking how these cards work. Next is Channeled Step. Choose one friendly fighter holding an objective that is not within 2 hexes of any enemy fighter. Place that fighter on another objective token that is not within 2 hexes of any enemy fighter. Give that fighter 1 move token. So a bit of a strange card. I imagine it's mostly useful if you're trying to get a specific numbered objective, but could be very tricky to actually do this because it does involve objective tokens not being near enemies, which is a little bit out of your control. Obviously, it depends on what the enemy's game plan is. Given this a B, particularly since it forces you to even get a move token, which makes it a little bit subpar in my opinion. There's Concerted Consolidation. Choose up to 2 friendly fighters in your territory and push each friendly fighter 1 hex towards the nearest objective token. So good card. I mean, double push. Given that an A, probably worth an S. I imagine this is going in everyone's deck. Does encourage a defensive play style though, which I think is really these guys' bread and butter, but might not be your preference if you're building a deck for them. Up next is Distracting Shot. Play this only in your power step. -1 dice from enemy fighters' attack actions in the next activation. So once again, they clarified the timing to make sure that enemies get screwed over by this on their activation. -1 dice, always nice penalty. Giving it a B because the opponent can obviously decide not to attack and then this card becomes useless. Great Bow Block. Play this only in your power step. Each time a friendly fighter other than Sleek is dealt damage in the next activation, reduce that damage to 1. So really great against scything, but generally good, just damage reduction in the next round. Can obviously be ignored if the opponent decides not to attack you in that round, but I'm giving it an A. I think it's a good card. And I think I misspoke. Doesn't reduce the damage by 1, reduces the damage to 1, which is very nice. Next is Healing Tempest. Choose 1 friendly fighter and roll 1 defense dice. On a roll of shield, heal 2 to that fighter, otherwise heal 1 to that fighter. So basically a healing potion. Useful card, giving it an A. There's Lightning Flare. Play this only in your power step. If in the next activation, enemy fighters cannot target fighters that are 2 or more hexes away. So a good anti-range card. Obviously very circumstantial, depending on if you're playing against a rangy warband, giving it a B. There's Raise the Alarm. Play this only in an opponent's power step. +1 dice to a friendly fighter's attack action in the next activation that targets an enemy fighter with 1 or more charge tokens. So extra accuracy if the enemy charged, so kind of circumstantial there, but increases accuracy. I'm giving it a B, could be worth a C. There's Stalwart Defense. Play this only in your power step. +1 defense to each friendly fighter holding an objective in the next activation. So very nice, especially if they're on guard because of Sleek, or if he puts them on guard in the moment that the attack happens. I'm going to give this an A because these guys revel in holding objective tokens. There's Swift Step. Choose 1 friendly fighter, push that fighter 1 hex, push that fighter up to 2 hexes instead if it is Sleek. So a sidestep or a better sidestep for Sleek, given that an A. And that does it for the ploys, which typically promote improving attack accuracy, teleporting, pushing friendly fighters, reducing enemy accuracy, healing, and improving defense. So moving on to the upgrades, we have Cautious Advance, restricted to Aphis. After this fighter's activation, in which this fighter made an attack action, you could push them 1 hex. So a pretty nice range shot or melee shot, then move them 1, or rather push them 1, giving this a B only because of the restriction to Aphis. There's Concussive Cloud, which is a 3 range, 2 hammer, 1 damage, knockback 1 attack, usable by all the Stormcast Eternals. And if this attack is successful, give the target 1 move token. Really, really powerful attack action upgrade. You could hit a unit, drive him back out of your territory, give him a move token, completely castrate them, given that an S. There's Cool Head, restricted to Melissan. You can reroll 1 dice in this fighter's attack roll, so very nice, but the restriction makes it only worth a B in my opinion. There's I'll Cover You. If this fighter has not yet made a Thunderhead Greatbow attack action in this round, each time a friendly fighter within 3 hexes is the target of an attack action, this fighter is a supporting fighter. So that's pretty cool. Can be applied to any Stormcast Eternal. Allows you to encourage you just to kind of save his Greatbow attack action until the end of the round, and then he just provides support to everybody, which is really nice if you're guarding and if you have that extra defense card, given that an A. Might be worth an S. Next is Long Range, so just a +1 range to the fighter's Greatbow attack action, given that an A. Good card. There's Loyal Companion, restricted to Sleek. As a reaction after another friendly fighter's activation, push this fighter up to 2 hexes so that the 2 fighters are adjacent. If you cannot use this reaction. So a nice way to get Sleek into the middle of things so that he can use his whole guard mechanic Warning Cry, giving that an A. There's Reconquer, which gives +1 move. And as a reaction, after this fighter's move action, you can push this fighter 1 hex onto an objective token. So maybe if you can't quite reach the objective token, you can get that extra little push to get on top of it. Or it could be a way to counter Slick Rock or something. I'm giving that an A. Next is Reconsecrate. As an action, this fighter can only make this action if this fighter is in the same hex as an objective token. Pick another objective token, place each objective token in the hex the other token was in, then give this fighter 1 charge token. So basically, Shard Caller allows you to swap objectives, which is great for these guys considering they have to hold specific numbered objectives. I wrote B here for some reason, but I'm giving this an A, just because of how practical it is with regard to their objective cards, although the charge token that these guys get as a result of using it is kind of a bummer, as well as the fact that it takes an action. So actually, maybe B is a better choice. Yeah, I'm going to stick with my B rating. Stoic Fortitude, +1 wounds, giving that an A, always good. And Strength of Sigmar, +1 damage to this fighter's range with attack action. So you have a great Fortitude and a great Strength, giving this one an A as well. And that does it for all this warband's power cards. So the upgrades typically promote pushing friendly fighters, improving accuracy, improving range, improving defense, improving movement, swapping objective tokens, improving wounds, improving damage, and an exceptional attack action upgrade in the form of the Concussive Cloud. And here is my big overview of this warband's cards. So objective cards, they have 1 great card, maybe 2 great cards with the holding objective 2-4 thing and the holding objective 1-3-5, or at least 2 of those objectives at the end of an opponent's activation. I mean, those are great cards, just a little bit tricky with the timing being at the end of an opponent's activation, but have many subpar cards as well, just 6 B rated, 4 to 5 A rated. Generally good though. Gambits also good. I mean, many A rated cards. Nothing that I'd say is really breaking the bank epic. Upgrades, I mean, debatably 2 that are S tier, mostly A tier. So definitely good upgrades, good cards overall, no doubt. And that basically does it. So let's rate this warband compared to all the other warbands. This is my summary of their qualities. First point being that they have a predictable objective holding playstyle. Anybody taking this warband is very likely going to focus on holding objectives. They gain extra abilities from holding objectives when inspired. Their objective cards are good and very centered around holding objectives. Power cards encourage holding objectives. I mean, not a huge shocker to expect what these guys will be doing when you're playing against them. And as I basically alluded to, they have powerful objective holding mechanics, which is a positive since they are trying to hold objectives. They also have dangerous range attacks doing 2 damage each, even when uninspired. However, they can only take 1 shot per round, which is a downside. And I would say that this ranged attacking option does complement their defensive play style, which is basically holding objectives, defending friendly territory. They do have generally weak damage output, 2 being their max on their fighter cards, meaning that they're not very effective at eliminating enemy fighters. And I didn't write it in here, but their defense is not great either, with 2 Stormcast Eternals only having 1 block defense when inspired, which kind of sucks. And finally, they have a solid control game, solid passive game play style, but they're not very effective at advancing into enemy territory. And clearly taking enemy fighters out of action is very effective and important in winning games, since you get a glory for killing them. You get the primacy token depending on the conditions in which you kill them. You completely ruin the game plan of the enemy by wiping out their characters. These guys are not great at it. That is definitely a downside. When I look at all these things, I've decided to rate this warband as a B, and this is how I compare them to all the other warbands that I've rated thus far, putting them in the B tier, as I mentioned, right after Spiteclaw's Swarm, because I would say that Storm of Celestus has much better cards in general, especially objective cards, than Spiteclaw's Swarm. Their guys are tough, they have range attacks, they have special abilities, but Spiteclaw's Swarm is very versatile with their high movement, the fact that they can bring back their dead units onto any starting hex. I think that generally speaking, Spiteclaw's Swarm has more potential to be successful than Storm of Celestus. I do put them ahead of Magor's Fiends, though, because they're equally as tough. They inspire in a very similar way, but generally speaking, their cards are better. And I just imagine them just doing a better job than Magor's. I mean, like I mentioned in previous videos, this whole grid is subjective. This is how I see Storm of Celestus comparing in the big picture across all metas when I look at them and all the other warbands that exist to date. So that does it for my video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, please comment below. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. And hopefully in a few days, I'll be releasing Drepper's Wraith Creepers, so you can get my thoughts on them as well. So thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a nice day.